Well, that was easy. Thank you. I think we have a good crowd tonight. Look at all those humans. Thank you for being here. I'm Robert McBride of All Classical Portland, and of course, this is Carlos Kalmar, the music director of the Oregon Symphony.
Good evening.
And let's just get this out of the way right now. He is the most talented person in the building tonight. I know you hate it when I say things like that, because it
yes, I do, because it
offends your modesty.
No, it's not about that, but do you know what all these wonderful people do?
Well, no, I don't, actually.
I'm sure that some of you, I mean, not that I want to single that out, but there might be doctors here who save lives.
That's true, okay. All right, let me start over. I am the most presumptuous person in the building tonight. So we have three works on tonight's program: an overture by Franz von Suppé, a Bartók Violin Concerto, and the Symphony No. 1 by Brahms. I know another thing you don't like is playing favorites, but if you had to pick a favorite on this program, I think I know which one it would be.
Well, yeah, Brahms 1.
Yeah.
Actually, Brahms 1, probably every symphony, I don't know what it is with Brahms and me. Probably in 10 years it will be different, but Brahms, anytime you give me Brahms, I will not complain like I sometimes do, in the sense of, not again. Mm-hmm. I've done it 25 million times. Just give me a break.
But not with Brahms.
Brahms, I don't know.
Yeah.
I always think that Brahms probably is somewhere watching us and already like thinking, that was not right, that was very bad. Don't do that.
He could be quite forthright in his opinions, too.
Oh, there are stories about him. I mean, which is very much Brahmsian humor, once he was at a party. It was fairly late in his life. He was at a party, and after half an hour he left the party by saying to everybody gathered, if I have forgotten to offend somebody, I'm very sorry for that.
It's a great line.
Or the other one, which I probably told that already, that of course sometimes young composers came to him and asked for his opinion. And there was this probably very mediocre composer who's young and whose name doesn't even appear in the story, and who brought him his newest symphony, this thick, and Brahms flips through it for 3/4 of an hour and just looks and looks, and his comment was, "Nice paper that you have here."
Ouch.
Ouch.
Brahms was known to frequent a pub in Vienna called the Red Hedgehog. Is it still there?
If you tell me the name in German.
Oh dear.
What's a hedgehog?
Hedgehog in German? I don't know. The
Okay.
Rot.
The Rote, yeah, but which one?
Yeah.
But the what? The Rote Adler. That beats me. But I know
I'll
that.
Google it later.
Yeah, but the thing is, Brahms also was known when he lived in Vienna, that he went out to to the countryside, which was at that time one part of the countryside was called Rodaun, and that's actually a part of Vienna on our day. I mean, every city grows, and so now that is integrated in Vienna. Rodaun is the 23rd district of Vienna. Vienna has 23. And in those days, you had to really take a walk. It was an entire afternoon until you get there. Today, you sit in your car, you drive for 25 minutes, and you are there.
Brahms, like a lot of other composers, Beethoven, Schubert, loved walking in general, but around Vienna. The Symphony No. 1 by Brahms is a very, very impressive first symphony. I can't think of any other example of a composer taking like 20 years to write his first symphony. Do you know if there are any others?
Not a symphony, but didn't it take Liszt 19 years to write his first piano concerto?
Yeah, that's true. He fussed with it. And
yeah, and that piece is only 17 minutes. At least the symphony is 40-some.
So you could put them both on a program and have, you know, the delayed gratification concert or something.
God, that is a horrible program. Actually, it's not. It's not. Liszt, Brahms, fine. Something modern to start.
Yeah, and you know, back then there was this huge divide in the music world between the relatively conservative composers like Brahms, who really loved the music of the past and studied it and edited a lot of works by Handel and earlier composers. And then there were the futurists like Liszt and Wagner. But a lot of that dichotomy was created by critics and the press and writers, and had there been radio announcers by them, not so much by the musicians, though Wagner was pretty critical of Brahms. But, you know, they all knew each other's music, and
Actually, Brahms liked the music of Richard Wagner. He liked, and he has been quoted saying that he actually liked very much to go to one of these 4-hour operas that Wagner, right, and said he loves it in Vienna State Opera. You can sit, the sides of the Vienna State Opera are boxes, and the boxes are actually, they have kind of a little back room. Yeah, all of them actually have that. And Brahms liked to go to Wagner operas because he said, yeah, and then I listen to the music for half an hour, and then I go in the back of my box, I drink a beer, I sleep for 15 minutes, and then I'm refreshed and come, all during the music, of course.
nice.
Yeah.
That's one of the best Wagner reviews I've ever heard, actually.
Yeah.
By the way, Wagner's 200th birthday is next Wednesday, and tonight's Club Mod show is all about Wagner's influence on later composers, all the way up to Thomas Addis. So that's airing on All Classical Portland tonight from 8 to 10, and you're going to miss it except maybe the very end in your car on the way home. But you can listen for a couple of weeks at our website, allclassical.org, where it will reside.
Yeah, I listened today to Edmund Stone saying, and Club Mod tonight.
Be there or, you know, be square.
I can't be there. I have to conduct.
Yes, well, you have more important
fun.
work to do and more fun.
More fun.
Way more fun.
Brahms' first symphony took him 20 years because Brahms was very critical towards others, but he was very critical of himself. And it must have been a real burden to him that when Brahms was barely 20 years old, another fellow, German composer, whom he was friends with, Robert Schumann, said, he hailed him. Schumann hailed Brahms as, this is the way to go, this will be the new Beethoven, and this will kind of save our classical music, and la la la. And they remained friends. Actually, the friendship between Brahms, Robert Schumann, and his wife, Clara Schumann, it's a legend. And when Robert Schumann died, Clara Schumann and Brahms remained friends for as long as they all lived. Now, Brahms at the age of 20 was of course very proud of being named such a great thing, but he also didn't feel encouraged to write a symphony, although all his friends said, you have the tools, you can do it, why don't you just sit down and write a symphony? And he said, I can't write a symphony because every time I sit down to write a symphony, I hear Beethoven stomping in the room. And it's and what am I supposed to do? There were very big shoes to fill. And this is one of the interesting things about Brahms, and Robert already mentioned it, in the divide of composers, modernists, developers, if you will, and conservatives. Brahms is a real conservative. He adored all the centuries that were before, and if Brahms would have been an innovator, he just would have written a symphony 18 years before he actually wrote one, because he would have said, oh yeah, Beethoven, great composer, but this is the way. No, but Brahms took it very to heart that there was Beethoven, and he didn't manage. And he actually attempted to write a symphony, and then probably wrote a couple of pages and then turned that into his first piano concerto, because it was not good enough. And finally, he wrote the first movement of that symphony, and he showed that movement to Clara Schumann. Robert Schumann was dead already. And Clara Schumann said, "This is phenomenal, you have to go and write the rest." And he finally it took him another 2 years after that to finally complete the work that you're going to hear. And you have said it, I think this is the best first attempt as a symphony that exists, probably, because it's literally everything. It's the fascinating thing about the only 4 symphonies that Brahms wrote is sometimes in music you hear between the first symphony and the last symphony an enormous development. Beethoven, between his first symphony and the number 9, that guy really developed. Mahler, the same. Bruckner, the same, etc. Even Schumann, there is something different how he writes music. Brahms, it's always Brahms. It's always so meticulously worked and so characteristic and so Germanic, in the best way of using that word. Meaning he's I always say that Brahms is Beethoven kind of, but Brahms is the only example of a composer who was German and lived an enormous chunk of his life in Vienna, but stayed true to his roots, meaning he was always a very German. He didn't have this light-handed style, and especially not in this symphony. And I personally think that this symphony, especially in the outer movements, is mostly about struggle. It's kind of a battle. It reminds me sometimes, especially the first movement, about this Sturm und Drang in German culture. It's kind of, he's looking for something. And of course the middle movements are, oh boy, that is in so good music, so beautiful. Just the joy of being able, as a concert mistress, Sarah, tonight, of playing that solo in the second movement together with John Coxon at the horn and Marty Hebert and the oboe. That's a joy by itself. Or the third movement, which I always describe as a stroll in the park. But then the struggle comes back, and finally, in the last movement, after this drama of the beginning, and after this short visit to the Swiss Alps, where he took one theme,
which is the horn solo. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. Then finally he formulates the theme of the last movement, which is, in its own way, very liberating, I think. It's, at the beginning, it's this, finally we have arrived, and it's so beautiful. Bad news, if you will, is that theme sounds like Beethoven 9. And everybody noticed and said, "Hey, Johannes, but this sounds like Beethoven 9. And he said, "Yeah, and every fool notices that."
Actually, the word he used was ass.
Yeah.
But you didn't want to say that, but yeah. Yeah. And you know, all week, anytime I've thought about this concert or anybody mentioned it, that theme has started playing in my head. It's so beautiful, and it's just an instant earworm. And I think it's a beautiful, wonderful way for Brahms, having finally found the courage to write his first symphony, to allude to and to salute Beethoven in that way. It's kind of like the Fifth Symphony in that it's in C minor. Beethoven's Fifth is in C minor, and then there's this big struggle, and it ends in C major. And then he alludes to the other most famous symphony by Beethoven in that beautiful theme. And I noticed that Brahms did not write a Symphony No. 5. I wonder if he was afraid to do that because of the comparison with Beethoven 5. Who knows?
I doubt it. And Brahms also, in regards to
I wish he had, actually.
we all wish Brahms would have written a lot of things. I mean, why didn't he write a Symphony No. 5? Well, he started late, and it took him a while, and he was very conscientious of, I have said what I needed to say, I need to move on to something else. He always was asked, why didn't you write a cello concerto? Never did. Well, he wrote the double concerto, which we are playing next season with Christian and Tanya Tetzlaff. Just, you have to come. They're incredible. And people also asked him, why didn't you write an opera? His answer to that was actually another typical Brahms answer is, you know, in music development, now everything gets so big. And now Wagner is using 8 horns in one opera only, meaning orchestras get so large. Where is this going to end? And, well, it ends with Strauss, of course, where it's just everything got so big, and he didn't want to go there. And so he wrote 4 symphonies, and that's it.
And he didn't need to go there. He became wealthy. He traveled a lot. He was respected and relatively happy, I hope. Another nice thing about Brahms that he could be very gruff to people, particularly strangers, but he gave a lot of money to a lot of other composers, other musicians to help them, often making them swear to secrecy, that they wouldn't reveal where the money came from.
Yeah, he was a very generous soul.
And he lived very simply. He was sort of a Warren Buffett kind of guy, had a very simple home, even though he could have been more lavish.
Yeah, he didn't have as much money.
Well, not quite
okay,
as much.
never mind.
But then who does? Yeah. Okay, is that enough on Johannes Brahms?
Yeah, because if we continue, which we can,
Which we could, yes.
yeah, then we are never going to talk about this Bartók and never say,
Bartók.
and we are not going to reveal what the overture is about or the opera.
We may not have time because we're working backwards here.
Okay.
But we have to talk about Jennifer Koh and Bartók Béla. Jennifer Koh, this wonderful young American violinist who's like Brahms in that she's very interested in and respectful of music of the past. She's been doing this big Bach project lately, but she's pairing it with new music as well. And she brings such integrity and joy and to everything she does. She's just great. She's worked with Jennifer Higdon a lot, has things written for her. And since you used to be a violinist, I imagine it's a great thrill for you to stand here and work with her.
Jennifer and I started working together. I don't know exactly, but I think it's 2001. And there is even, not that I want to sell something to you, there is a recording out there of Jenny playing Szymanowski concerto and Bartók, what is considered kind of the movement of the first concerto, and another piece.
Recordings for sale in the lobby.
With me on the podium and Grand Park Orchestra, which, by the way, the Szymanowski concerto is spectacular. And we did it here, by the way. This is the 3rd time that Jenny's coming since I have been here. And it's just a joy to work with her. And of course, last time we met and worked together, which I think it was something like a year and a half ago, we talked and what are we going to do next? And she said she would love to do Bartók number 2. Because Bartók number 2, you need to be a good match. It's not that you don't need to be a good match with other things, but what I'm talking about is it's easier for a soloist to survive well something that Mozart wrote, because it's fairly simple comparing to this one. But Bartók, you really need a great partnership. And so we tried and we really rehearsed well, and it's an incredibly difficult concerto. And it's a long concerto. It's a really big piece. And Béla Bartók wrote it for a friend of his who the friend asked him to write a concerto, and Bartók at first wanted to write a piece that is a set of variations. But he then got convinced, now please write me a normal concerto, and then he wrote this concerto that you're going to hear tonight, and did a very strange ending, because the piece in its original version ended without the soloist. The last minute or so is just the orchestra playing, and the soloist stands there and doesn't have anything to do. And the friend for whom, Mr. Secchi, for whom he wrote this concerto, said, Bella, listen. Can you just write something normal with an ending where I participate? So Bartók complied and wrote the ending that everybody plays. The ending that we are playing is kind of became the standard ending. The piece is very, it's very fun, it's very Hungarian, and it's very rhapsodic. I mean, sometimes the violin seems to have a new idea or a new way to formulate the idea of music and takes completely off. And it works in such a way that in each movement you feel like the music flows and comes to a deliberate stop and goes in a very different direction and then starts again. And even in the last movement, it always works like that. And since it's a music that focuses on certain, what we call intervals, all these kind of intervals come from folk music in Hungary. Although the piece doesn't utilize any songs, but it's the coloristic element is that.
It's interesting the way Bartók spent a lot of time traipsing around, notating and recording all kinds of people in Hungary and Romania singing folk songs. He was one of the first ethnomusicologists. And the way that influence finds its way into his concert music makes it sound earthy, makes it sound Hungarian. But at the same time, he's very intellectual in terms of the form. He wrote 12-tone melodies that weren't Schoenbergian, but he would use all those notes and these themes. He even uses quarter tones a little bit.
Yeah, there is
it's a
one
cool spot.
Just watch out for this spot in the first movement, very towards the end of the first movement. There is a spot where Jenny plays slowly, and you think, what's wrong with her intonation? No, it's how it's written. Because she plays quarter tones, which sound a little bit wrong. It's a coloristic element that comes.
I like it.
It's just wonderful how she plays that.
You got to have a good ear to play the violin and to play music like this. Wow.
Oh yeah, and it takes a lot of practice until you arrive to the point of playing this one.
Am I wrong about this? It seems to me that Bartók has a somewhat lower profile than he had 10 or 20 years ago. His music doesn't come around as often.
I don't know. I can't answer that one, because Bartók always had, for many of his pieces, this flair of being an intellectual. His music, since his music, the melodies of his music and his language tend to be not so easy to grasp at first hearing. Big exceptions are early pieces or the Concerto for Orchestra, which we have done here. Those are very approachable pieces, easy to grasp. But even in this concerto, the great thing about this concerto, for example, is it starts and you are immediately submerged in something that you think, oh, this is wonderful. That melody is so beautiful. I probably will be able to sing it once I leave the concert hall. But a minute into that melody, it goes in a very different direction. You're like, whoa, that is a turn. And sometimes the music sometimes screams at you, and when it whispers, it has colors that are, you have to hear it twice, which means tomorrow you have to be here too.
And Monday.
And Monday. I mean, it's worth it. This is one of the greatest concertos written in the 20th century, and also it is a concerto that made the composer very happy. Bartók, at the time when this piece was written, was really struggling with the political situation of his country, Hungary, because Hungary, at that time, 1937, 1938, was heavily, the people in charge were heavily leaning in favor of the Nazis. And Bartók was terribly ashamed of that and finally left the country and emigrated to the United States, where he died.
And all of 10 people attended his funeral. I'm even going to do better than that. I hope. Promise me you'll come. 12.
12.
Do I hear 13? All right, we're probably out of time. The first piece is an overture by Franz von Suppé, who had 7 names altogether.
Yeah, which I never remember.
I can't remember him either.
Yeah, it's a very... Yeah. Franz von Suppé, when I was young, I always thought Franz von Suppé is French. Because Suppé...
He was Dalmatian.
He was Dalmatian by birth, which at that time was a part of Austria. And Suppé, I thought that he was French because Suppé has an accent on the E. Otherwise it would be Franz von Suppe, which means Franz from soup. Kind of odd.
I wonder if that's how the Soupy Sales got the idea for his silly name.
Franz von Suppé, a real Viennese composer.
From what is now Croatia. So
Yeah.
how did he become so echt Viennese?
No, but all of them did. I mean, you look at this, Suppé, very Viennese, Croatian. Mahler, oh, he was very, very Austrian. And he was not born, I mean, it's not Austria now. I mean, not that we are going into history, but once upon a time, Austria, the empire, was so enormous. And now it's a tiny little country in the middle of Europe. But anyway, Franz von Suppé wrote an enormous amount of music that is completely forgotten. And if you listen to the overture you're going to hear tonight, you think, what's wrong? And I can't answer this, because his music, the one that is being done, meaning this overture, the Poet and Peasant overture, and the Light Cavalry, are just to die for. So much fun, so musical. With people like Suppé or the Strauss family, who can actually write waltzes, you immediately grasp the fact that they are so musical. And Franz von Suppé was so musical. And this is, when you look at the rest of the program tonight, this is the right balance, because it starts, it's like you go to a restaurant and the waiter comes and asks, do you want something to drink before you start the meal? And you say, little glass of champagne, please. It's a little sparkle. That's how this overture works, before you get to the real meatloaf, which is Brahms.
That's a great way of looking at it. Thank you. I'll drink to that. So this is our last videotaped chat for this season. We will be at this again next season, but all these pre-concert chats are archived at All Classical Portland, at allclassical.org. It's been a pleasure.
Always has been.
Carlos
Robert McBride.
Kalmar.